Okay, fellas, here we go. And it's all about land. There's many ways that you can buy land, but not all of them are going to be right for your situation. There's tons of ways you can finance them and purchase them. And we're going to be talking about the pitfalls of all the ways you can purchase a piece of land. There's going to be cash, of course, mortgage, and some more unconventional ways like seller financing, land contracts, lease purchase, land swap, which was new to me. Oh, and auctions. We're going to be talking about auctions because that was one of the ones that I learned as a real estate agent, and I think you should know as well. So let's just get into exactly what a land auction is. So yes, it is possible you can buy a piece of land through a land auction. Most of these websites work in a way that you basically see the piece of land. They give you a little bit of information on it, whether it be a plat map or mineral rights. It's very vague. They tell you where the boundaries are, and sometimes they'll tell you where the setbacks are. They'll also let you know what kind of purchase that you're making on this piece of land, whether it has any encumbrances, meaning if there's any tax liens on it or not. I've had several clients have a really good experience when buying a piece of land through an auction site, and I've had some that haven't had that great of experience at all. So let's get into some of the pitfalls when it comes to buying a land at an auction. First of all, they don't let you see the piece of land ahead of time in most cases. They just put it up on the auction site and they have the auction within a few days. Second, a lot of times they're making you pay for the piece of land in full at the time of purchase. Cash done. Most of us don't have that kind of cash on hand unless you're buying a very inexpensive piece of land. Three, they're not guaranteeing anything they know about that piece of land. For all they know, it was a garbage dump before they decided to sell it. Not all land auction sites work this way, but just buyer beware when it comes to land auction. So before you ever go through any land auction site, make sure you understand the area that you're trying to purchase it from. Make sure you understand the usage of that piece of land is. If it's in a residential area, what is it zoned as? Do your regular kind of investigations prior to going ahead and throwing up that paddle. Like I said, you can get a really good deal with a land auction, but I don't want you to end up buying some swampland that's absolutely useless. So let's get into the next one, which is land swap, which was something new to me, but I found out some great stuff about it from some homesteaders. So land swaps is exactly what it sounds like. You're swapping a piece of land that you already own for another piece of land that somebody else has. You think that their land has something more that you want. Without even really having to think about it, I'm sure you're already knowing what could be the problems of swapping a piece of land with somebody else. First of all, the piece of land that you are swapping may not be worth the same value as your specific piece of land, and vice versa. Secondly of all, you may not know all the non-uses that you could do with that piece of land. For instance, if you were looking to make a homestead and you want to have some goats and chickens on that piece of land, you may find out that after you've swapped it that the county doesn't allow for something like that. Thirdly of all, you might have a problem in the future with your title work if you're just going ahead and swapping that piece of land instead of doing the correct way of actually transferring title and ownership. Lots of things you can go wrong when you're swapping a piece of land with somebody else. I would never land swap with anybody. It makes me very nervous, especially if you're not going through a title company. Don't do it. Don't do it. If you're thinking about doing something like this, always make sure you do your due diligence ahead of time, or you go and have the whole piece of property investigated, have an appraisal done on your own cost to make sure that the land that you're going to swap with is worth the money that you're willing to pay for it, and find out any kind of restrictions you may have on that piece of land so you can do what you want to do when you decide to swap it with another person. Now, I've had many people ask me about this, which is seller financing. There's several different ways that seller financing can go, and it's going to vary by state and by person, especially if you're going through the seller itself to financing. I would suggest that if you're going to do seller financing, that it is recorded somewhere that you are making payments to that specific seller for that specific piece of land. Now, this is going to be different than a lease purchase, and we're going to be getting into that in just a minute. When you're seller financing, you're literally just making the payments to the seller, but it is documented somewhere that this is what those payments are for. You're going to have a better legal standing if there is some kind of documentation there if you plan to go this route. Just know that when you're doing any kind of seller financing, you're still going to need to have approval from the seller itself to do anything to that specific piece of land. Just like any piece of land that you purchase, make sure you find out what the restrictions are in that area. But at any time, that seller can come onto the piece of property and say, I do not authorize you to put a new well in there. Or, I do not authorize you to do anything that you want to do to that piece of property. Some seller financing will work out really good, but I've seen it in some cases that some sellers are just being really super picky. They'll let you go ahead and pay for that piece of land, but they don't want you to do anything to it until it's paid in full. So just be aware of that if you're considering doing seller financing. Now, another thing that you need to be aware of is if the seller hasn't been paying their mortgage or their taxes on that piece of property at the time that you've been paying your portion. So you've been paying all your payments, but the seller hasn't been paying it to the bank or to the tax assessor's office. And then there becomes a lien on that piece of property. You may not even know about it. And then when it seems like you've paid off your land in full, it isn't paid off at all because you have this big tax lien on the piece of property itself. So just be aware of that. Make sure you keep an eye on that if you're going to do seller financing. You can always look in your local county assessor's office to make sure that they have been paying their taxes on time for that seller finance piece of land. Just think about it. Just do your homework. That's all I'm saying. All right, let's get into lease purchase. This is very common here in the state of Louisiana. It may not be common in your area, but a lease purchase kind of sounds like you're almost like renting to own, but that isn't the case. When it comes to a lease purchase is when you put on a contract on the piece of property, you're going to agree to pay for that piece of land over a very short period of time. Usually a lease purchase is over 1 to 2 years, and you're going to put down a very large deposit. Before you sweat it though, that large deposit still goes towards the purchase price of the piece of land. So let's just say that the piece of land is worth $100,000. The lease purchase contract says that you need to put down $20,000. That whole $20,000 at the time of closing goes towards the purchase price of the piece of land. Now, at any time, if you do not pay for your payments during that lease purchase, that whole entire $20,000 is poof, gone. It goes to the sellers. Now, the reason you would want to do this is if you're just trying to clean up some credit history problems, you have all the money in the bank right now, the lender that you're working with says there's going to be no issue in about 3 months, so you have this lease purchase contracts within a year, so you know that within that year you're going to be able to purchase it, and you live in a hot area, so you want to make sure that you can secure this piece of land that you've fallen in love with. Of course, the downside is the fact that you could lose your $20,000 deposit. Again, just like I've said and every time beforehand, make sure you investigate that piece of property, do your due diligence. You're going to have a lot more time to have all those inspections done to that piece of property. When you do a lease purchase contract, make sure you write in there that you are doing your inspection period. If anything comes up during that inspection period, you're still entitled to the whole $20,000 that you get back. It's important to work with a licensed real estate agent that understands lease purchase contracts and with a title office, so that way you are in the clear and you're protected when you're making out these contracts. It is a great way to secure a piece of land, especially the ones that you've fallen in love with, but don't get in over your head. Don't lose $20,000. I don't want you to do that. Now, another way you could purchase a piece of land you may have heard of is called a land contract, which is different than seller financing, and it's different than a lease purchase in the fact that you're not paying any kind of like interest payment. You're just paying the seller what you owed. So if you agreed to pay $10,000 over 5 years, you're only paying that $10,000. In a way, that's like the best way to do it, but in a way, it's really the wrong way to do it. Because first of all, again, if you do anything to that piece of land, it belongs to the seller. And at any time, they can tell you to take off anything on that piece of land because you don't own it. Secondly of all, there's nothing in documentation saying that you have any rights to that piece of land at all. Thirdly of all, if the seller doesn't make the payments that they have on that specific piece of land, you may be kicked off that piece of land if you have a homestead there or have started a homestead there, and you might have to up and leave one day. And another reason why this may not be really great, if there's anything that tragically happens to the seller itself, it may get tied up into some inheritance laws problems. Even though you've made that deal with that specific seller, that doesn't mean they made a deal with the person that inherited the piece of property. And if you don't have a specific contract in hand that says that you have rights to that property, you can end up with a big giant pickle, and I don't want you to do that. I know it sounds great, especially since you're not paying interest, but it can bite you in the butt in the long run if all these things happen to you. Now, I do know some people that have gotten land this way and it's worked out great for them, but I just want you to be very cautious. Of course, do all the things like I've always told you on every part of this. Make sure you do your due diligence on every aspect of this piece of property, so that way you know that you're putting your house in the right place. Make sure you have a plat map, all those kinds of things. I know you've heard all this and you're probably saying, that's okay because I'm buying cash and I'm special. Well, you're not so special because there are some pitfalls when you buy something cash. You might be in a hurry and you might think that you've gotten yourself a better deal because you paid cash, but you may have not done everything you needed to do before you purchased that piece of property. So if you're buying cash, you may not be as liquid as you need to be if there is some kind of emergency that comes up in your life. Anything can happen at any time. So when you've taken a big bundle of cash that you've nested for your future and you don't have that cash on hand and something happens, big giant red flag for yourself. Now, when you buy land, you don't necessarily get as much of an investment on that piece of land as you would on an actual property that had a house on it. Land tends to go up in value very, very, very slowly. And if you took that cash instead of buying a piece of property and put it in assets that will return you in a lot more money, you're going to be better off. If you have the ability to take that money and put it in more liquid assets, I would suggest you do that. Financing a piece of land can be a hassle, and we're going to be getting into that in just a minute. But I would rather you have more cash on hand for emergencies than having it invested in a piece of land, because land doesn't really bring you in that much money over a long period of time. Not saying that it won't, it certainly will, but it won't be as quick as it would be for like a house, let's say. Another thing about buying a piece of land with cash, in some areas, in some states, they kind of give you like a penalty for paying cash all at once. I'm not sure how true that is. I heard it through the grapevine that in one specific state, I won't even say the state, that it was a liability for you to go ahead and pay cash ahead of time, that it was better off. You get more of a tax exemption, just went ahead and financed it. Just check into that with your local state rules. That's not a thing here, but it could be in your state. All right, so now you're looking into buying it with a mortgage. Now, I get this. This is a really great thing, right? Because you won't fall into any kind of liabilities. You'll have more cash on hand, like I just told you to do. But there are some things that you need to know if you plan on buying a piece of land with a mortgage. First of all, when you do that, you just know that your interest rate is going to be higher on a piece of land than it would be for your typical mortgage. And that's just because they're covering their butt. They want to make sure that that asset brings them in money. Usually land is a lot less expensive than a house that would be on that piece of land with it. So this is just a way for the banks to earn more money. You can't fault the bankers. I mean, you can fault the bankers, but you know what I'm saying. Everybody needs to make money. Now, just know that if you don't make your payments when you do a mortgage, you're going to lose the piece of land. It's a foreclosure process. It's exactly the same. It may take a little bit longer because it is just a piece of land, but it may be even quicker because it's just a piece of land. The only way that it would delay a foreclosure process is to go ahead and pay all the payments that you've missed. Another thing too, some mortgage companies will make you pay your taxes separate from your mortgage payment for your piece of land. If that's the case, make sure you stay up to date that whole entire time with your mortgage and your taxes. I mark my calendar and make sure that I pay all those things on time. My mortgage, my insurance, my payments. I have a reminder on my phone because I'm kind of dingy. I'm not going to lie. I forget everything. My brain's Swiss cheese after 40. Now, you may have been keeping up a lot of cash on hand and you were thinking about getting a mortgage, but just know that even though you have all this cash on hand, your credit matters. And if you cannot qualify for a home loan, you're most likely not going to be qualifying for a loan to buy a piece of land as well. So keep that in the back of your mind. If your credit is garbage, you're most likely not going to be able to get a land loan. Actually, the restrictions to buy a piece of land and your credit history is going to be weighed much more heavier than if you were to buy a house in most cases with most lenders. Just know that ahead of time. And again, you're going to be paying more in interest rate. And it most likely is not going to be a 30-year mortgage. They have them set up between like 7, 15, and 20 years to pay off a land loan. But each lender is going to be different when it comes to that. So check with your lender to see what the terms are for the amount of time that you're going to have to pay those mortgage payments. Now, these are all the ways that you can buy a piece of land, but there's tons of stuff that you need to know when it comes to purchasing a piece of land. Now, if I was to buy a piece of land, I would do one way and one way only, and that is through a mortgage, because I want to hold on to my cash as much as possible. Granted, there's some things that could be as far as loopholes, but I get it. But which way would you choose to buy a piece of land? Would you do the lease purchase? Would you do the seller financing? I want to know. Let me know in the comments section below. I know I didn't cover everything you need to know when it comes to actually looking at a piece of land and what, the boundaries are and landlocked, and there's so many terms that you need to know. So you're going to want to watch these videos right here. They're super informative. My name is Kristina Smallhorn, your real estate whisperer, and I tell you all this because good real estate information matters.